It's a pleasure to have Rabbi Amy Wallk of Springfield, Massachusetts, with us, a long time teacher of Melton, former director of Melton, and we're here to speak about what's being called the phenomena of October 8th Jews. So thank you, Amy, for being with me.
Thanks for inviting me.
So I'd like to begin with a question just about what this is about. We've sort of seen a surge of interest in Judaism following the October 7th attacks. And I was wondering if you can just describe any of the unique characteristics of this October 8th Jew phenomena. What motivates them, and what are their existing levels of knowledge? What are their primary points of connection? What are they concerned about? What can you tell us just from your perspective?
So I'm going to answer just to remind you, I am a rabbi in a small community. Springfield has maybe 1,000 Jewish families. There's an Orthodox, Reform, and Conservative synagogue. There's a JCC. The preschools has more non-Jews than Jews, like many, right? Like, so that's a context here. And we're like in the middle of nowhere, right? Like Springfield, we're between Boston and New York, but we're
Mhm.
this small little place. And the reason I want to sort of emphasize that is I don't know if my experience would be replicated in bigger cities. Like, I haven't seen a surge in shul attendance, truthfully.
Mhm.
What I've seen is people really want to find ways to better understand what's happening in Israel. That's really important to them. I can't tell you how many people I have referred to the Times of Israel daily podcast. I can't
Hmm.
tell you how many people have become fans of Dan Senor's Call Me Back or Yossi Klein Levi and Danielle Hartman's For Heaven's Sake. And I think what people are looking for is many of my congregants and people who are on my list who get my emails, they're looking for ways to digest the news because they actually know they can't trust the legacy press. So they know that if they read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, that's not going to help them. And so what brings them in the door to connect with what I'm putting out is access to different kinds of news sources, because they're like the peoplehood piece of them woke up on October 7th. And for many, that's enough, right? And they're good with that and they really appreciate it. But others are turning and saying, I want to, they're not saying it explicitly, it's implicit. I can
Mhm.
sort of see the wheels turning and they're saying, if I'm lumped with these folks and I'm sharing the fate of these folks because I'm Jewish,
Hmm.
maybe I need to know a little bit more about who I am and what that means. Not a huge number. I want to say, like, I think the vast majority of the people I come in contact really wake up in the morning saying, how do I make sense of what's going on in Israel? How do I respond to fill in the blank? It depends what bad thing happened in that week, or right. And so folks are really focusing on that piece. And then others are really feeling called to say, how do I learn more about who I am now that who I am is an issue and it matters? Does
Yeah.
that make sense? Are you understanding what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah. I think it's kind of like two categories you're speaking about. The people who are just intrigued, they need to know more about Israel, about anti-Semitism, about what's going on, and then the people who are kind of wondering if I'm really connected to this people, and I don't really know enough about that. Maybe I should be
Right.
seeking an
The only,
opportunity. Yeah.
the only thing I want to say is the first category, they're not intrigued because that feels like it's more curious. The first
Hmm.
category feels woefully inept to respond to the moment. Like, I
Mm.
actually think it's a stronger feeling than intrigued.
Hmm. Feeling like incompetent, feeling like it's their responsibility to respond to this moment because they're Jewish and they should know more.
Yes, and they have learned not to trust the legacy press.
Hmm.
I mean, I think it used to be that if there was an issue that I wanted to understand, I felt comfortable Googling it, looking, or, just reading the newspaper and saying, this is going to help me feel informed about. But I think they
Hmm.
understand since October 7th that they can't trust the legacy press. So they're first coming to me saying, who can I trust? or how can I understand this? And that's been a really serious issue for many. And then I think that sense of betrayal
Hmm.
from, it could be the public schools sometimes, right? Because of how Israel's taught, that sense of betrayal from an institution like the New York Times that people felt they believed
Yeah.
in and they trusted. That sense of betrayal has led people to say, I wanna know more about me, but I just like 2 groups of people. Some really wanna know more about who I am, right, who they are as Jews, and others
Mhm.
are, I wanna know more about this situation because I know this situation is really important and I feel empowered. I just wanna say, like, last night we had dessert with some congregants. These are people in their 40s, and they both are saying, "I wanna go spend time in Israel." That's
Well,
the other piece, is like it is very clear to them that they need to be in Israel.
hmm. So given this combination of wanting to know more, either about or feeling the need to know more about Israel, and not being able to trust the usual outlets, and those who are seeking to figure out what their own connection is with this. Are there thoughts you have, or like things you're doing in your community, or suggestions you might have for other communities of ways to support or create spaces for people like this to like process these experiences and these concerns, these new interests?
So one thing I do is, I now have a column that I send to the congregation every week. We send 2 emails a week, one on Monday, one on Thursday. And the Monday email has a column, and most of the time I'm writing about something not about Parshat HaShavua, right? That's my Devar Torah on Shabbos morning.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm writing about something that has happened or is happening, right? And obviously, because I'm a rabbi and not a journalist, it's framed in a Jewish way and in a Jewish voice, and it brings in Jewish text, but it's a Jewish perspective. And in that, besides that, I actually have a section in my emails called What the Rabbi's Reading, with links to articles and podcasts and music. So just as an example, when the Bibas boys were brought back to Israel, which I think, like, the pulsating pain that went through my community, I mean, every community, right? Like, it was unbelievable. I wrote something very short, but then I referred people to some articles and conversations that they weren't gonna get anywhere else but in Jewish press or in a Jewish space, because the New York Times, and I know I'm banging on the New York Times a lot, but I'm harping on it, but their headline was that the babies died in captivity, right? Like, and I think they call them hostages. So, like, I wanna help people. So I think giving people access to voices that are bigger and that are analyzing, and sometimes I do the analyzing, but honestly, a lot of times, why should I do it when Mati Friedman does it so well, right? Like, so that's
Mm-hmm.
part of, so that's one way of responding, and a lot of times we've had, gatherings, right, in an attempt to try and bring the community together. Um, Obviously, we did that right after October 7th, and we did that on the anniversary of October 7th, and we're planning on doing it, on October 7th, 2025, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
in these moments, I think it's good to bring people together.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one really important way to respond. And then we've done programs throughout the year to respond to 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 bring someone to our community, um, who can help us digest what's happening, right? Because I think that's an important piece. That's one piece, and the other is, I think, to continue practicing really solid Judaism, right? And in other words, to continue to have classes and minyanim and services and, right, like, the joyful stuff that we need to be doing, and to not both relate I mean, almost everything is seen through the lens of October 7th on the one hand, and on the other hand, I know I get to this place where I say, "I need a break from October 7th." Like, sometimes I wanna hear or give a Devar Torah on humility, on
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
importance of Shabbat, right? Like, I'm not gonna let October 7th define our Judaism, but I know that it weighs on people, and so threading the needle where I make room, but um, I make room, and then I also remember the foundational core of what Judaism is teaching, which is not about responding to hate, but about living a beautiful Jewish life,
Yeah,
right?
so important.
Um,
So important.
so one last thing that I did that I know was really well received is like I sent out a Hanukkah card that
Yeah.
talked about the Maccabees and also about internal strife, and I connected it to the moment, obviously. And in it, I included a tefillah leChayalei Tzahal, a little card, which is like for prayers for Chayalei Tzahal. And, I said something like, as a mother of a combat soldier, I say this prayer a lot. And many people have said to me that they put it in their wallet, it's on their kitchen table. Like a lot of people said, receiving the prayer really, it made them feel like they had something they could do. And I sent it as a Hanukkah card, so it was mailed to everyone. People have asked if if they could have copies of these little cards that they could give to their
Hmm.
children. And
Hmm.
I think that was a very real, meaningful connecting
Right.
point.
Right. It's beautiful. You know, I'm on a trip here with a group of Melton learners in India. And of course, we've been here during all the news that's been happening in Israel this week with this particular week, as you mentioned, with the Vivas family and the tragedy surrounding that. And of course, the buses exploding and all that's been going on. And, as much as we're trying to absorb um, India and what's happening here, it's very hard for people to be completely separated from what's going on in Israel. And actually, we spent Shabbat in a synagogue in Calcutta, and a synagogue where people don't generally pray anymore, but except when groups come through and they make a prayer and make a prayer service happen. And we took the opportunity. Here we are, far away from everything, to chant this Misha Berach, this prayer for the soldiers. Um, and I led that and turned around, and all kinds of people were crying. And
Right.
it doesn't matter where we are. This sense of like what's happening there is so powerfully embedded in their being and their concern all the time. It's really something to see. What about Amy? What about kids or teenagers or college students? And have you had any of that kind of interaction, or things that parents have asked you, like, what do I say to my college students under the circumstances, the fallout of October 7th with campuses? Anything you can share about that from your
So
experience?
So, I'm just going to remind you, I have two kids, one's 23 and one is 26. And they they had some friends who were still in college or graduate school, both of
Hmm.
them. And so through their peer groups and congregants that I already know, right? I have had congregants reach out and sort of say, help, like what's going on? And sometimes they just need like someone to talk to, quite frankly, but sometimes they need like resources and to be given tools on how to respond. And there, I think those are like personal conversations and um, connecting points. Like kids have called from different universities, and I've been able to reach out to colleagues and say, these are people who you could talk to. In anticipation, though, we're teaching a class for our high school kids on the history of Zionism. My husband, who's also a rabbi, is actually teaching the class. And each class has, I think he does it, ancient, modern, contemporary, and where he tries to weave together like what's in the news in this moment, how does that connect to modern Jewish history, and what's the connection to the
Hmm.
ancient story. And part of what he is trying to do is to first of all make sure our students who are going off to campus understand that the Jewish connection to the land of Israel predates 1948 and even predates like 1880, right? Like, so that's one piece. And the second is he's trying to give the kids, the high school students, tools to respond to tweets, to as the news is being unfolding, because again, there is such an obvious bias. We want to kind of help them learn how to become critical readers, but also informed
Mm,
readers. And I think that that is definitely a piece where if we'd wanted to offer a class like that 5 years ago, I do not think that as many people would sign up, and people are really grateful, and there's more of a sense about that. And I suspect that I think that the kids who are in the class are very often in non or in our religious school world, attendance is spotty, and it's and there. I think this feels more compelling. And even some kids who have been confirmed have come back and said they want to take the class because they want to have this information.
mm. It's fascinating. I think it's a few times in our conversation so far you've alluded to the importance of continuing, education and continuing to, be involved in learning. Um, I think we completely agree with you over here at the Florence Melton School. It's such an important component. Can you speak a little more about that? Like just the way that you see the role of Jewish education, or whether it be about Jewish history, about Israel, whether it be about Judaism, how that plays a role at this moment for you?
So I plays a role. I want to talk first about kids for a second, and then I'm going to talk about adults, right? So
Sure,
for
sure.
kids, I think one of the really important things is to, because most of my congregants go to public high school, is to remind them that when they're in a public school setting, there's a Jewish lens that can be applied. And
Yeah.
so, for example, when they hear about the Crusades in public school, they may not hear what happened to the Jews, because to the rest of the world, the Crusades may not be about what happened to the Jews when the Christians were on their way to redeem Jerusalem from the Muslims, right? So, but where else are they going to learn that and have that lens and have that story? And so, part of what I think we have to help our children understand is that they have their own story, and whereas others may not be telling them or teaching them their story, we have to give them the tools to help them find their story and bring their story into a conversation, right? And that's a particular piece of that is, it feels more important now than ever, because
Hmm.
this is such a dark moment.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was true 10, 15 years ago as well, but now it's crying out more so. So that's for children. For adults, I think to my mind, there are two pieces. One is, and if I'm repetitive, forgive me, but one is to remind people of the incredible wisdom that Judaism offers, and the incredible way in which Judaism can give a lens to live a meaningful life. Like last week, where I just finished teaching a Melton class, it was on the one hand, it was a basic class. It was about Shabbat, Kashrut, and Mezuzot. And on the one hand, you might think, well, any Melton learner would know about those three things. But actually, we talked about it in a way and gave sort of new meaning to the practices. October 7th didn't come up once, and yet there's a way in which the classes were an opportunity for people to say, how can I live into my Judaism more? How can I bring more intention and more meaning to my practices, and then my practices can enrich my life? So that's
Hmm.
one piece, right? The other is like responding head on to October 7th and saying, actually, we need to understand why the term colonialism is ridiculous, why genocide, why ethnic cleansing, but why they don't, that's not part of the Jewish story, and that's not part of what happened in Israel. But that's a response to the news, and I don't
Mhm.
want all of my education to be about responding to current events, because it's exhausting. And I think that, like, the educational efforts need to both be enriching and uplifting and fortifying, and we need tools to respond. And so, like, I don't want to lose. I have to hold on to both of those lines, because both of those approaches, because they're both really important. And then within that, there are classes, there are articles, there are, there are speakers who come, like we did a Shabbat Shira, where the cantor who came, like, she just has a beautiful voice. The services were so uplifting and they were so beautiful. And yes, October 7th was there because October 7th is always there, but it wasn't the focus.
Mhm.
Are you following?
Yeah, for sure. It's a balance at all times. We want to do. Look, we had the same issue, of course, with Holocaust education. At a certain point, right? We don't want all Jewish identity. We saw that basing too much of Jewish identity on the Holocaust has some negative impact because it becomes my whole Judaism is kind of a reaction to what they did to us, which isn't
Right.
what we're striving for.
And yet, like making sure that people read Dara Horn's book, making sure, making sure that people understand that the idea of Holocaust education today is different than we understand Holocaust education today differently than we did 10 years ago, and the impact and the ways in which it's failed. Like, I think like that, I do think we really have to inform people, but that goes in the category of responding to October 7th. That doesn't go in the category of Judaism as a tool for living a rich life. And I like that balance feels really important. And I need to say, like, I struggle for the balance. Like I do it in my own life. I know that, like, my daughter is a combat soldier, and
Mhm.
the attacks in Bat Yam the other day, she was in Bat Yam at her friend's. Like it's in like it's pulsing through my blood, and I have to watch myself to say, like, you can't give your congregants your anxiety and your stress and use Judaism for you and for your congregation. And that's like a personal piece for me, but I know it's not just for me, that lots of Jewish educators have a version of that story.
Yeah. So, Amy, if let's say, just theoretically, let's say, 20 members, 20 adults in your congregation said, you know what, we're we we're just so distraught. We want to be together, and we'd like to learn something with you. What might you suggest? Like, what, given they're really talking about the fact they'd like to be together, they like to understand more, they don't even know what to ask for in terms of what they want to learn more about. Is there any particular topic that you could think of that right now you, as the rabbi of that congregation, of your congregation, would want to commit them in a 6-week class? What would you learn with them that would address kind of your whole perspective and what people need to know, or what people would be best, would benefit from the most by learning right now?
So if I'm hearing your question, you're thinking about those folks that need tools to respond to this moment. And for those folks, I think a class on modern Zionism, I think, like, we're bringing Yardena Schwartz, who wrote Ghosts of a Holy War. She's
Yeah.
coming to our community on October 7th, which
Mm,
happens to be the second night of Sukkot. And my hope is that over the summer, people will read the book so
mm,
to prepare for that. But
mm,
I actually think that that's a really important, like, historical context is really important for people. And so if we're in the responding to October 7th mode,
mhm,
I actually think something like that would be very important.
mm,
And I think in some ways, Hebrew literature is really important because Israeli literature very often is a response to the moment. Studying Israeli music is also a response to the moment. And there's something I happen
right.
to really love, right? Like that's in that category. But if those same 20 people said, we just want to be together as Jews because we want community, I mean, they're, quite frankly, I think classes about Jewish living are really important, whether
Mm,
it is learning about Shabbat. Like I said, the class that I just did, I think, like, the people who were in the class, I think it really fortified them to say, I want to rethink and enrich my Jewish living.
mhm.
And sometimes it's revisiting basics, and other times it might be exploring maybe texts of Musar or some Hasidic teachings, like things like that, which are not about October 7th,
Right.
but they're about much about what Judaism is really about. Like, it's balancing the oys and the joys.
So I think that, right. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, you're teaching an online Melton Plus class for us at the end of March, and it's on Passover. Isn't it about Pesach in some way?
Yes,
And
it
I
is.
think that Seth Dimbert, our director of online learning, if I recall correctly, he had said you wanted to do something which is really just brass tacks, like what's the basic idea of a Seder, and that you had shared with him the feeling that you had that that's what people need. And Can you elaborate a little bit? I think the idea came from you. If you could elaborate a little bit on that.
So I think like an old friend from Kansas City wrote me last week, and she said, we're going to be in Chicago for Passover with my son's girlfriend. She's Jewish. Everybody's Jewish. We really want to have a great Seder. Can you help me think about what that would look like? Right? Because like people want to have a great family gathering. So for my mind, the trick is, and for the Passover classes, how do I help people understand the structure of the Haggadah a little bit better? How do I
Mhm.
give them a few tools so that um, they can have meaningful conversations for the people at their table? And so if you have a lot of young children, it's going to be very different than if you have a Seder and everybody at the Seder table is in their 30s and, older. And like, and so a part of what I want to do is really give people tools to have a great Seder based on who's at their table, right?
Mm.
But also
Mhm.
recognizing what is a great discussion in 2025 look like? And it's going to be different than a great discussion in 2020, right? Like it
Mhm.
just by definition. And so
Right.
that's where I want to use that. And really, that's what happened. I'm going back to this class I just taught because it was it sounded basic, but the things that we talked about were really like, is Shabbat about the
Mm.
individual or is Shabbat about being with community?
Right.
Right? Like that's a profound question, actually.
Sure
That
is. It
we
sure is. Yeah.
right, and and that's and is kashrut about, like, is kashrut about just because God says so? Not just, but because God said so? Or is kashrut because I wanna instill the next generation with a strong sense of Jewish identity? Or is it because that's what mom and dad did? And when you ask those questions, you you're gonna have a better and a richer informed understanding of, so what am I doing and why am I doing it? And
Mm.
that's where I think people's Jewish they're this moment is calling people to say, I want to understand my Jewish identity better. And that was going to help me understand how I practice better. And I
Yeah.
can't just doing what I did without understanding it is not going to take me where I want to go.
Yeah. I think that I've heard anecdotally from faculty and Melton learners this past year that it seems like no matter what course people were studying, they found new meaning, inspiration in the texts and the learning that which wasn't necessarily the way it was written. It wasn't for that purpose, but it became an incredible inspiration and a connection for them, whatever that topic was. And it was surprising how varied the topics were that spoke to people at this moment. I don't know if you have something
A
to
hun-
add to that.
100%. So first, like, Professor Joe Lukinski of the Jewish Theological Seminary used to talk about Parshat HaShavua glasses, right? And it like, and he used to say that if you look through the week through the Parshat HaShavua glasses, you would have new insights, right? And that it was but one of the things he also said is you never wore the same glasses twice, right? So my version of that is I've never worried about giving the same sermon 2 years in a row, or saying, oh, she said that 5 years ago, because I'm a different person, and a different person brings a different perspective and a different lens. And so by definition, I'm just not going to repeat myself because I'm not the same person.
In
And so I
person.
think what I've seen is, and that's what you're talking about, is post October 7th, we're just looking at the world differently. And so we're seeing texts that we thought we knew, and we're making new sense out of them, or they're speaking to us in new ways. I taught a class for Melton last year about how the siddur was a tremendous source of it anchored me and held me in ways that I never imagined. And I didn't, it was October 7th that showed me text. I mean, like, I'll use an example. I've been singing Hoshia Et Amecha since I was like 5 years old. But in
Mhm.
a way, I understand those words now in a way I never did before.
Mm.
Right. And so, like, I can get very verklempt just thinking about that, where before October 7th, it was a good song that I remember singing on Hoshana Rabbah, and you know, so that's, I think, like a great example where 100% we see things that we didn't see and they were there.
Yes. Well, great. So I hope that maybe people, having had a chance to meet you through this interview, will consider taking your class at the end of March on the Seder. Is it just remind me, it's a
It's a
single class?
two-part class. It's a two-part class. It's an hour each time. I like to do hour classes because I just think
Mhm.
on Zoom it's hard to sit longer sometimes.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it's really, we're going to look at the Haggadah and we're going to have a sense of who's going to think about the different people who could be at the Seder and how can we engage them in a conversation about peoplehood, about freedom, about responsibility. And along the way, since I like to cook for Seder, we'll obviously talk about the foods we're serving and all that sort of
Awesome.
stuff.
Sounds like a spectacular class. Doesn't matter if you've made one Seder or you've made 100 Seders. Well, probably most people never made 100 Seders, but whether you made one Seder
I don't know. It's feeling like it
or
sometimes, but that's another
that's
story.
true. You make two Seders, and that's could be. That's whether you made one or 100.
Yeah,
It sounds like there's something people could get from it. So it sounds great.
yeah.
Thank you
I just
for.
want to say the last thing that I love about teaching is that when we're in a class, I always leave feeling like I learned something from the students. Like somebody asks a question or poses it or makes a connection. And so for me, the class is not about what I have to give, although obviously I spend a lot of time and I want to give to students, but it's very much about what I get from teaching and from the
Mhm.
students who are always thoughtful and really keep me on my toes.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I agree with you. That's
All right.
one of the best parts of adult education is how much we get out of it.
Absolutely. 100%.
All
So
right. Thank you.